Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest webinar. We're really excited to get started. My name is Brittany Segal. I am Envoy's Director of Marketing, and I'm actually going to be kicking off today's webinar, NAFTA and the TN Visa, a comprehensive overview. So for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, we do these webinars monthly, but I wanted to also provide you a little bit of background about Envoy as a business and what we really do. So Envoy is the leading immigration services provider. We combine expert legal representation with technology to provide the only enterprise platform that enables companies to effortlessly hire and manage their workforce across borders. So that's everything from navigating U.S. immigration to securing global work authorization, really looking at business visas to track and manage all of your international employees. Really, we run the whole gamut of immigration. And right now we're doing that for over 1,000 companies across many different industries, locations, and company sizes. So we know that global immigration is frustrating and confusing and can be really stressful and inefficient, and it's always been our goal to really ease that pain and that burden from you, and that's really what the mission is at Envoy. So before we get started, I wanted to have a few housekeeping items to go over with everyone. The session is being recorded, and we will be sure to send you the recorded session for your reference to share with others in your organization. So that will be sent out via email after the show, and we will also be posting it to our resource center online, and you can probably find a link on our blog as well. So there are a lot of different places we'll be sharing this. The presentation will last for about 30 minutes. We'll obviously leave some time for Q&A at the end. So if you're interested in asking a question, please feel free to use the question function on the right-hand side of the webinar screen. The webinar that we're going to be covering today is really well suited for HR practitioners with limited knowledge of immigration and specifically the TN visa. So if you're looking for more of an advanced webinar where we're really going into business structures and functions and how it relates to immigration, be sure to check out our resource center. We do have other webinars that we've already recorded that suit that. We also will be doing that more level 2 in-depth content in late September. So details to come will be sent out, and they'll be coming soon about more level 2 appropriate webinar topics. So just so you're aware, everything is on the Resource Center, and you can access that at any time. So just looking at the agenda, we'll be running through the following items today. We're going to be giving a really comprehensive overview into the TN visa. We're going to be looking at any potential drawbacks that the TN visa may have for your employees. We're also going to cover some best practices and tips for your organization to consider as you're looking to file a TN visa. And we're also going to discuss some of those NAFTA changes that keep popping up in the news from time to time. It's important to note, and we'll repeat this again, time and time again, nothing has been passed as it relates to NAFTA. It's just a lot of speculation, but there is a lot of news stories that are surfacing daily. So we definitely want to touch base on that just to talk about it a little further. And then, of course, we'll answer any questions that you may have at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Louis Massard is an attorney from Global Immigration Associates, which is a law firm that's affiliated with Envoy. He has built and submitted hundreds of non-immigrant and immigrant work visa petitions. He has extensive experience handling B, E, H, LO, and TN visa cases, employment-based green cards, and U.S. citizenship and immigration services requests for evidence. So we're really, really excited to have Louis here to review the TN visa and to provide some quick updates about what's going on with NAFTA. So with that, I will turn it over to Louis.
Thank you, Brittany. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to talk and to teach you about really what is one of my favorite visa categories. By the conclusion of this presentation, I think everyone will find that the TN visa offers employers very flexible and very accessible options when hiring professionals from Mexico and Canada, our two closest neighbors. Let's start off with the very basics. So who's eligible? As noted earlier, citizens from Canada and Mexico are eligible, and these citizens must be members of over 60 listed professions. Kind of a brief listing is included there in the second grouping, but then there are also some less common professions such as librarians and foresters. Nearly all of these professions require a bachelor's level degree in a related field, right? So, and some actually require a license, such as lawyers, architects, and medical professions. There are tremendous advantages to the TN visa category. So, unlike H-1B and H-2B, there's no annual cap to the TN visa category. That basically means that a TN applicant can apply any time of the year. There's no statutory max out, so in theory, TNs can be renewed indefinitely. Another important point for employers is that there's no prescribed wage level set by the Department of Labor. The Department of Labor is not involved at all in the TN visa process. And also there's a great deal of flexibility afforded to TN applicants in the application process. You can bypass USCIS altogether. Canadians can apply directly at the US-Canada border, and Mexicans can apply directly at their US consulate or embassy abroad. Anyone entering in TN status will generally be permitted to enter for a period of 3 years. TN status can be renewed for 3 years, and as noted before, there is no max out on TN status, so theoretically, TN can be renewed indefinitely. TN also permits for dependent visa benefits. A TN visa holder can be accompanied by his or her spouse or unmarried children under 21 years of age in the TD dependent classification. The biggest drawback is that TD dependents, cannot work, but they are permitted to attend school in the United States. Now, as with everything, there are some potential drawbacks. Aside from the obvious limitation that the TN visa category is limited to only 2 nationalities, the other drawbacks are that the TN visa category is not dual intent, which means the TN visa applicant cannot express a desire to stay permanently in the United States and also be approved for TN status. This is the lack of dual intent is actually the case for most temporary visa categories. Now, the fact that the TN visa category is not dual intent, I think often lends itself to the belief by some that you cannot apply for a green card from TN status. This is simply not true. There is, however, a travel restriction towards the end of the green card process where TN green card applicants must kind of remain in the United States for a period of about 3 to 4 months after green card submission. Also, the change of employer process for TNs is less streamlined as some have maybe experienced with the H-1B category. Whereas an H-1B worker can generally begin working for a new employer upon the filing of a new petition by that new employer, a TN employee must wait for the approval of that new employer's petition before they can start working for that new employer. This slide contains a pretty comprehensive list of evidence required for a TN petition. With these materials and details about the sponsored position, we can generally draft a comprehensive letter of support. When assessing a particular candidate's eligibility for TN status, we can generally assess that candidate's eligibility with just a resume and a detailed job description from the employer. Now, on the right column, there are some additional documents needed if your candidate intends to apply from inside the United States with USCIS. Just basically evidence demonstrating that they have maintained their status in the United States. This next slide is essentially a summary of application options, or options for how to process a TN visa. If your candidate will apply for TN outside of the United States, the process really depends on where they're from. Canadians, again, can apply directly at the border to a customs and border official. and they're actually visa exempt, so they won't actually get a visa stamp inside their passport. Mexicans, however, must apply at the U.S. consulate abroad through a visa stamping process, and they actually receive visa stamps in their passport, which would then enable them to enter the United States in TN status. Now, if your candidate is in the United States, they have the option of filing a petition with USCIS, or the candidate can depart briefly from the United States and apply from abroad. The process of applying for TN status with USCIS we find isn't utilized very frequently because the travel required to apply abroad is not so burdensome, and applying from abroad often results in a fast turnaround. This slide discusses some best practices and tips for employers and employees. From the very beginning, it's important to ensure that your candidate possesses a related bachelor's degree at the outset. You want to ensure that your case is opened and submitted to attorney review with enough time prior to the target start date. If your candidate is, say, Canadian and applying at the border, they will also want to be prepared to provide evidence that they have no permanent intent to remain in the United States. And that can include bank statements, evidence of family members abroad, evidence of property abroad. Also, the candidate should always review the letter of support very, very closely to familiarize yourself with the detailed job duties so that they can familiarize themselves with the nature of their application if asked by a consular official or by a border official. Finally, I wanted to discuss some potential changes to NAFTA and what may ultimately occur in the future. So just some very brief background about NAFTA. NAFTA was launched to eliminate most tariffs on goods traded between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and to remove regulatory barriers. It also created the TN visa category to facilitate the flow of professional services. And people have been understandably nervous about NAFTA's future and what it means for the TN visa category. On May 18, 2017, the administration gave notice to Congress that they intend to renegotiate NAFTA or modernize it, as some may say. Those expected formal talks are expected to begin late August or early September after the required 90-day wait period. And there doesn't appear to have been any talks or any movement in that sense quite yet. There have been no official statements made by the administrations on their intentions regarding the TN visa category, but we can expect that it will be reviewed in the course of this renegotiation modernization effort. We're still in a wait and see period. It's too soon to tell what the outcome of these efforts will be, but because changes are possible, your organization should work with Envoy and GIA to remain apprised of any NAFTA developments. And with that, I'd like to open it up to any questions that anyone may have.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Louis. So one of the questions that we're getting in has to do with the related bachelor's degree that you had mentioned earlier in the presentation. Is that a related bachelor's degree to the job that they currently have or that they're going to actually be traveling for? Can you expand on that one a little bit?
Absolutely. So for instance, if a candidate is being sponsored for an engineering position by your organization, USCIS, the consulate, or the border official will seek to ensure, will look and expect to see that the candidate possesses an engineering degree. The same applies for a statistician position. Those government officials will expect the applicant to possess a statistics degree and that the position that they are being sponsored for is statistics related.
Okay, great. A couple more questions coming in. Is there a cap for TN visas?
No, there's no statutory limit on the number of TN applicants in any given year.
Okay, great. Can you expand a little bit more on the advantages of a TN over an H-1B visa?
Absolutely. So as noted before, I think the biggest distinction between the two is the fact that the TN visa is not dual intent, whereas the H-1B is. So in other words, an H-1B visa holder can unequivocally express a desire to remain in the United States permanently and still be admitted in H-1B status or be renewed for H-1B status. That ultimately is the biggest distinction. A TN visa holder, as noted before, cannot at the border or at a consulate say that they're coming to the United States to remain permanently, even if that is maybe their intention or that's in the back of their head. So in the green card process, we find that there is just that one wrinkle towards the end where for about 3 or 4 months following the submission of a green card application, that TN visa holder who has now applied for a green card should remain in the United States until they receive their temporary travel authorization that we include with the green card application.
Okay, great. And we got a request to go back to the documents slide, so I'm just going to put that up in the meantime and leave that up. Just as a reminder to everyone, we will be supplying the recorded session after the webinar is over. We will be sending that in an email to all registered and non-registered people can access it directly through our website. We'll be posting it on our resource center as well. Got a few more questions coming in. Here's an interesting one. Is a TN visa transferable to a new employer? So the scenario that they're proposing is, let's say an employee has a valid or validity for a few years and has a visa stamp. Can he transfer his visa?
The answer is yes. So the process is just perhaps a bit different than people are accustomed to in the H-1B context. So as noted previously, a new employer basically must wait until their new TN petition is approved by USCIS in order for that employee to begin working for that new employer, right? So we find that oftentimes in order to transfer employers, right, and to change employers, we find that the fastest route to do this, for this change to take effect, is for the candidate to depart from the United States briefly and either apply directly at the Canadian border if they're Canadian, or directly to the U.S. consulate abroad in Mexico. So the answer is yes. However, there is that distinction between what we're accustomed to in the H-1B context, those portability rules that permit an H-1B worker to begin working for a new employer upon filing, and in the TN context, which is just different.
Okay, great. What is the actual average processing time for a T1 visa right now? What are some of the times that you're seeing and experiencing?
Well, it's important to remember also that TNs who apply to USCIS can actually request premium processing, which is currently suspended by for the H-1B visa category. Premium processing ensures with USCIS, it ensures that USCIS will respond within 15 days of submission. Processing times for Mexicans applying at their consulates abroad really vary according to consular wait times. I would say perhaps no more than a month. And TN applicants who are applying at the border of Canada are issued a decision immediately by that border official.
And here's an interesting question about the documentation requirements. Do you know if it's okay to have a copy of your transcripts, or are they expecting the transcripts to be original?
We find that, for instance, border officials, for Canadian applicants, their approach to what is required, originals versus copies, really kind of varies. So we often insist that the applicant take their original diploma and official transcripts with them to their border interview.
Okay. We are getting a couple of questions about potential changes to NAFTA just based on what's being seen in the news. I do think it is important to remind everyone, as Lewis had mentioned, that nothing has been proposed officially in any official capacity. Nothing has been passed at this point. So everything is pure speculation. There is no way of knowing if anything does happen to NAFTA, if that will directly impact TN visa holders that currently have that visa, and whether or not that will impact their stay and ability to travel. So again, we will make sure that anytime there is an actual proposal that's being sent to Congress or actually being talked about either from the administration or down through the ranks, that we will update everyone accordingly. So we will be sending out emails to all of our customers, and definitely we'll be covering that on the blog should that happen. But in the meantime, just so everyone is aware, nothing has changed at this point, and everything is pure speculation. Quick question about self-employment. Is it possible to be self-employed and still get a TN visa?
I think generally those sorts of petitions are generally not accepted by USCIS or by the consulate or by border officials. There is, however, one category, one somewhat problematic occupational TN category where it is somewhat permitted. It's called the management consultant category. Those management consultants are intended to be kind of independent contractors consulting to a U.S. company on a very spot basis. But aside from that, it is generally frowned upon and generally not accepted.
Okay, great. So one question that's coming through is about those education requirements. Again, does the typical equivalency process apply for educational requirements for the TN that are similar to what the perm-related qualifications are?
You know, yes and no. Effectively, if you have a bachelor's degree, or 4-year degree from a Canadian institution, if applying in Canada, a 4-year degree from a Mexican institution, and you're applying at a consulate abroad, generally we find that education equivalence evaluations aren't required in those instances. Obviously, if you possess a bachelor's degree from a U.S. institution, that there's never an equivalence evaluation required for those.
Going back to the management consultant occupation that you just mentioned, there has been some experiences where it seems as though it's been under scrutiny or more scrutiny by the USCIS. Has that been true in your experience?
Yes, and it has been for several years now.
Here's a really great question about intent on staying in the U.S. permanently. Can you expand on the actual evidence needed to prove that you have no intent on staying in the U.S. And how permanently to stay in the U.S.? There is a question here about having an employee who is a Canadian citizen but actually has no family living in Canada or any property. So is his renewal more likely to get refused if he has little to no evidence of his intent to return? And what are some things that he can actually take with him to prove his intent?
I mean, I think ultimately, if there are no ties whatsoever to the country of Canada, I think ultimately that does raise the prospect of a border denial. However, the things that you could include, obviously, are perhaps a voting record in Canada, evidence of having had to pay taxes in Canada, and those are probably only two things I can think of without delving into the specific case more closely.
Mm-hmm. And if you do have more specific questions about your case, you can definitely post to the Communications Center, and your assigned attorney can actually look into that a little bit further and provide you more detailed insight. So just as a reminder to anybody on the call, if you do have a specific case question, you can absolutely post to the Communications Center at any time. Another question too, if a company with employees who hold a TN visa is acquired by another company, is it enough to give them an adoption letter, or do they need to reapply under the new entity?
I think in most of those circumstances, an adoption letter or something to that effect would suffice. But again, these specific sets of facts would need to be reviewed more closely on an individual basis.
Okay, great. And can you advise on any type of questions that you maybe have seen or come across in your career that are being asked at the border during these interviews? Any typical questions that come up with clients that are applying for a TN visa?
Absolutely. I think the universe of questions that applicants should be prepared for are largely contained within the letter of support that we prepare. So the questions that typically arise are about educational and professional experience, and also about the where you will be employed, and also for whom and for how much, and the duties you'll be asked to fulfill.
Great. So in addition to the TN visa, are there any other similar country of origin specific visas that we should be aware of?
Sure. There are specific categories of H-1B-like visas. One that comes to mind is the E-3 visa, which is for specialty occupation professionals from Australia. And there's also the H-1B1 category for foreign nationals from either Singapore or Chile. And
just an announcement too, we will be holding another webinar in September, September 21st, and it will be called The Beginner's Guide to Immigration. So we will actually be tackling multiple visa types on that webinar, and we will be providing details about all of the popular visas. We have this fantastic guide that we're putting together and we'll share as an asset following the webinar. So start thinking about maybe some additional questions that you have about popular visas or specific visa categories, and definitely be sure to join that webinar. We will be covering that next month. So I'm just checking to see, we have a few more minutes on the webinar, so let's see if there are any more questions being submitted. So regarding Canadian requirements, do you know if there are very strict requirements that they have about any type of criminal record or any type of criminal background that someone may have which may prevent an employee from actually being approved for a TN visa?
There are, and actually the criminal grounds for visa ineligibility are set forth in our laws, right? And they're just, it's a very extensive list. Basically, any sort of controlled substance violation, any sort of violation that that has to do with immigration fraud, those are the sorts of things that will generally prevent a TN or really anyone from entering the United States.
Okay, wonderful. So we are getting a few questions coming in. Some of them are very specific to cases. So if you do have specific case questions, just as a reminder, you can always post them in the Communication Center, and your direct attorney can answer them and provide more context than we can at this time. So definitely be sure to check out the Communication Center and post there if you do have questions. And again, as a reminder, we will be sharing these slides and this recording after the webinar, so you will be able to access it multiple times in multiple locations, but it will be emailed to you directly. And one final question, is it important to include any additional documents regarding the end client in the U.S., such as an invite letter or a statement of work?
Potentially. If somebody is working at a third client location, we would want to be able to document that employee is actually an employee of the petitioning TN sponsor and not of the third client where they will be placed. And the way that we do that is either through end client letters and other contractual records where we can link the petitioning employer to the employee and any entities in between.
All right, great. Well, we are right at 1:30, so we will be ending the webinar, but we just want to thank everyone again for attending. Real quickly, I'm going to show you back to the end screen. There are HRCI credits and SHRM credits that you can take back and apply to your account. We will again be sending this presentation out with the SHRM and HRCI information, so it will be included. But if you have any questions about that or have any trouble accessing either of those things, please feel free to contact us directly, send an email to insights@envoyglobal.com. And again, thank you so much everyone for joining us today.